We take it. The final battle against alien tyranny and humanity's unstoppable victory. Snow and static devoured the horizon. The streets of Cryon 7's capital were a blizzard of blue lightning veins, dancing across the metallic husks of abandoned market stalls. Kael Draven, tall and broad-shouldered, his black hair whipped ragged by the wind, moved like a shadow through the chaos. The storm's electromagnetic surge burned across the sky, drowning out all sound in a low, vibrating hum that crawled into his teeth. Through the haze, he saw them, 6 Cryon children, skin glistening in pale silver under the electric light, huddled together beside a collapsed transport sign. They were stranded in an open street, the storm's plasma arcs crawling dangerously close. For a moment, Kyle hesitated. He had learned long ago that hesitation kept smugglers alive, but these weren't smugglers. They were terrified, half-frozen kids who didn't know how to move without being fried alive. He cursed under his breath, sprinted across the street, and waved them toward the jagged silhouette of his ship, a battered courier vessel with her paint long since scoured away by ice storms. The Iron Wraith, barely flight-worthy, wasn't meant for heroics, yet tonight its cargo hold became a shelter. He sealed the hatch behind them, tossed each a protein ration from his dwindling supply, and fired up the portable heat emitter bolted to the bulkhead. The metallic hum shifted to a comforting thrum as warmth began to spread. The children didn't speak. Their species rarely did to strangers, but they watched him with wide, luminescent eyes, their small hands wrapped around the thermal blankets he'd thrown. Kael tried not to notice the weight in his own stomach. Those rations had been meant to last him another week. The emitter's energy cells would need recharging soon. That was his problem for later. From the shadow of an alley beyond the storm, Seris Veyra watched. Her tall frame was draped in a merchant's traveling cloak, but the glint of bioluminescent tattoos along her temple marked her as no common trader. Strands of her white hair curled like frost smoke around her face, and her violet eyes were fixed on Kyle with unsettling calculation. She had seen enough strangers come to Cryon 7. Bounty hunters, informants, imperial buyers. This one didn't fit the pattern. Why would a human risk himself for Cryon children in the middle of an electromagnetic storm? Was it a ploy to gain trust? Was he here under orders from the Steel Council, or perhaps the Black Star Alliance? Her cover as a merchant had brought her close to all manner of outsiders, but this one radiated something different. Still, she didn't approach. Not yet. A misjudged move could drive him away, or worse, reveal her own mission. The storm was far from over, and the streets were too exposed. She would wait, gather more, and decide if Kael Draven was a threat or an opportunity. Outside, the blue lightning clawed at the domed skyline, and the Iron Wraith stood as a lone pocket of warmth in a world built from cold metal and older mistrust. The storm had passed, leaving the streets slick with frozen arcs of metal and frost. The air still tasted faintly of ozone, each breath stinging Kyle's throat. He was leaning against the ramp of the Iron Wraith, tightening the latch on a loose panel, when a shadow detached itself from the mouth of an alley. Seris Veyra stepped into the pale light, the merchant's cloak brushing the icy ground. Her eyes, deep violet and unblinking, studied him like a biologist observing a dangerous specimen. She let the silence stretch until Kael glanced up. "You're far from any trade route," she said, her voice low but sharp-edged. "Merchants don't wander into Cryon 7 during storm season." Kyle's gaze flicked over her cloak, her boots, the way she carried herself. "And yet here you are," he replied, fastening the last latch. "Guess we both make poor life choices." Her mouth curved, not quite a smile. "Poor choices can be profitable, unless you're here for other reasons." She let the words hang, baiting him. "I'm here to keep my ship in one piece," Kyle said flatly. "Everything else is noise." Seris tilted her head as if weighing the truth in his tone. She circled closer, her eyes darting briefly to the ship's cargo hatch. "The children, were they yours to protect?" "They were in the wrong place at the wrong time," he answered. "Same as me." She let out a slow breath, as though filing that response away for later. "If you can keep people alive in a storm like that, there's a place you might be useful. But it's not here." Kael arched an eyebrow. "And why would I follow a stranger to an undisclosed location?" Sarah's expression didn't shift. Because if you stay in this district, the Steel Council will find you before the next storm rolls in, and they won't be asking polite questions." Silence settled between them, cold as the frost underfoot. Cal studied her face, searching for the telltale twitch of a liar. He didn't find it, only a measured calm and something hidden behind her eyes. "Fine," he said at last, "but I'm keeping my ship close." Her lips twitched almost in approval. "You'll need warmer boots. It's a long walk." They moved quickly, slipping through narrow service corridors that snaked between the outer districts. The city's steel skeleton loomed above, its spires crusted with centuries of ice. Past the last watchlight, the path narrowed into a canyon of frozen stone, the wind sharpening with each step. Cal kept a few paces back, watching the way she navigated without hesitation. The darkness thickened until the only light came from faint green luminescence in the ice walls. Finally, she stopped before a sheer cliff face, laid her palm against a patch of frost, and murmured something in a language Kael didn't know. With a groan of ancient mechanisms, the cliff opened into a cavern mouth. Warm air, tinged with the scent of machinery and stone, flowed out to meet them. "Welcome to the Hollow Mountain," Seris said softly. "Let's see if you survive the introductions." The Hollow Mountain wasn't a natural cave. It was a fortress carved into the bones of ancient stone, its walls lined with layered plating, salvaged from derelict starships. Inside, the air was warmer, humming faintly with the power of buried generators. Dim amber lights traced narrow walkways suspended over deep chasms, the sound of dripping water echoing far below. Kael followed Seris through a series of switchback stairs until they reached a broad chamber. A man waited there, tall for a Cryon, but stooped with age, his silver beard streaked with black. His eyes were sharp and restless, scanning Kael as if stripping him down to the bolts. This was HFY Veyra, the kind of leader who carried more scars in his mind than on his body. "So this is your find," Jorik said to Seris without looking away from Kael. "A human. Not many of those left who come here without a price on their head." Kael kept his hands at his sides. "I'm not here to cause trouble." "Everyone says that before they cause trouble," Jorik replied dryly. He stepped closer, his boots scraping against the metal floor. "Who sent you? Black Star Alliance? The Steel Council?" "No one sent me. My ship broke down. I was in the wrong quadrant, and a storm nearly turned me into frozen scrap," Kael said. "That's the whole story." Jorik's gaze flicked to Seris. "You believe him?" "I believe he can keep people alive," she answered evenly. Jorik grunted. "We need more than survival. We need someone who can open doors the Council keeps shut." Kael narrowed his eyes. "And what doors would those be?" "The ones in the main energy station," Jorik said, his voice low. "Inside is a prison block holding our people, and the core conduit, the device that controls the crystal network keeping the storms in check. Without it, this world dies. With it, we can make the Council bleed." Kael crossed his arms. "That sounds like a suicide mission." Jorik's tone hardened. "It is, but if we do nothing, the Council will sell every crystal to the Black Star Alliance, take their ships and leave us to freeze. You understand?" Kael hesitated. He'd run jobs for dangerous people before. This, though, was war. "What's in it for me?" he asked. "Away off this planet," Seris said, her eyes locked on his. "When it's done, we'll get you to a trade hub. No Council patrols, no bounty." He studied her for a long moment. The promise might be a lie, but if it wasn't, it was his one way out. "Fine," he said, "but I'm not dying for your cause. I'm here for the job, nothing else." Jorik's mouth twitched into something almost like a smile. "We'll see about that." From the shadows above, unseen figures moved, armed rebels watching their newest recruit. Kael could feel their eyes on him as Seris led him deeper into the Hollow Mountain. The mission had begun, whether he liked it or not. Cryon 7's main energy station loomed like a black glacier on the horizon, its spires etched with blue conduits pulsing faintly under the frozen sky. From a distance, it could have been mistaken for a shard of the planet's own ice crust, but the patterns of light betrayed its artificial heart. Kael stood with Seris in the shadow of a cargo hauler, both clad in dull gray uniforms of Cryon maintenance crews. The fabric itched and smelled faintly of ozone, the kind of scent that clung to machinery rooms. "Don't speak unless spoken to," Seris murmured as she adjusted the collar of her disguise. "And if anyone asks why you don't know the shift codes, you're from Sector 12. Half their crews barely speak cryonic." Kael gave her a sidelong look. "You make lying sound like breathing." She didn't smile. "You'll need to breathe a lot if you want to survive this." They approached the outer gate. Two guards in segmented armor scanned their passes. Counterfeit IDs Kael had modified from old freight tags. He watched the reader light turn green, masking the small swell of pride in his chest. No alarms. Inside, the station's corridors were narrow and precise, with walls that hummed faintly from the energy flowing through hidden conduits. The air was warmer here and carried the faint tang of processed crystal dust. Kael caught Seris glancing at a distant lift shaft, recognition in her eyes, but she kept walking. The core conduit was housed deep inside the station, behind layers of both mechanical and biometric locks. The first was a rotating pressure door sealed with an encrypted code. Kael crouched beside the control panel, his fingers dancing over the interface. "You've done this before," Seris noted quietly. "Once or twice," he said, "usually with someone shooting at me." A soft chime and the door rolled open. Beyond lay a chamber of crystalline supports, glowing with soft azure light. The core conduit floated at the center, a cylindrical device with braided energy coils and a pulsing heart of light. But what drew Kael's attention wasn't the device. It was the data console beside it, screen half filled with encrypted communiques. He began scrolling, his brow tightening. "What is it?" Seris asked. He angled the screen toward her. "Looks like your Steel Council's been making deals. Black Star Alliance is getting every last crystal in exchange for relocation ships. They're leaving this rock to the storms." Seris froze, her jaw tightening. "That was not part of any plan I knew." Kael's eyes narrowed. "You worked here before, didn't you?" She didn't answer, instead moving toward the conduit. "We take this. Without it, their deal dies." He hesitated. "If we do that, alarms will trip. We'll have minutes." Her hands brushed the surface of the device. "Then let's make those minutes count." The quiet hum of the chamber seemed to grow louder, as if the station itself sensed the breach. Somewhere deep in the walls, machinery stirred. The hum became a scream. Red warning lights strobed along the crystalline supports, painting Seris and Kael in pulses of blood-colored light. Somewhere above, a klaxon wailed, its tone dropping sharply as automated security systems came online. Kael cursed under his breath. "We didn't do anything. What set it off?" Seris was already scanning the chamber walls. "Remote audit. They must have checked access logs. We weren't on the shift roster." Boots pounded in the corridor beyond. Kael glanced at the core conduit. Its coils pulsed with a steady heartbeat of light, the size of a man's torso, dense and heavy. The original plan had been to steal only its access codes and leave the hardware. But the thought of leaving it here, for the Steel Council to use, clawed at him. "We take it," he said. Seris whipped her gaze toward him. "That's not negotiable?" "Yeah, it is. Without this, they can't just rebuild control somewhere else." Kael stepped forward, disengaging the magnetic locks with quick, precise motions. She hesitated, jaw tight. "You'll slow us down." "Then you'd better run faster." The chamber door hissed open and two guards in segmented armor burst in, rifles raised. Kael dove behind a crystalline pillar, drawing the short-range pulse pistol hidden under his maintenance coat. He squeezed the trigger. One guard's weapon sparked violently. The other staggered back under the impact of Seris' shock baton. "Left corridor," she barked. Kael slung the core conduit into a reinforced carry harness, the weight dragging at his shoulders. Together they sprinted toward the side access hatch, Seris punching codes into a service panel while Kael fired back down the hall. The hatch opened into a maintenance shaft barely wide enough for one person. Cold air rushed upward from somewhere deep below. "How far?" Kael asked. 300 meters down. There's a coolant junction we can bypass to the outer vents." 300 meters? He gave a humorless laugh. "Guess that's one way to skip leg day." They slid into the shaft, boots scraping metal as they half climbed, half fell through the twisting conduit. Sparks rained from above as a pursuing guard fired wildly into the shaft mouth. By the time they tumbled into the coolant junction, Kael's shoulder burned from the harness weight, and a shallow cut across his ribs leaked warmth into the cold air. Seris glanced at it, but said nothing. Time was bleeding faster than he was. They forced their way into the outer vent system, crawling between rattling panels until the blue light of Cryon's night spilled through a grill. One last shove, and they were out, rolling into the snow-dusted underbelly of the station's service docks. Kael tightened the straps around the core conduit, every muscle aching. "Next time," he panted, "we make an exit plan before we grab the oversized glowing thing." Seris gave him a thin smile. "If there's a next time." The hollow mountain was quieter than usual when they returned. The great chamber's generators hummed low, and the usual murmur of voices was replaced by the occasional metallic echo from the walkways. Kael noticed eyes following them as they carried the core conduit to the inner council room. It wasn't admiration, it was calculation. Suspicion sharpening like a blade. Jorik Vial stood at the far end of the chamber, leaning heavily on a steel-plated staff. He didn't look at the core conduit first, he looked at Seris. "You brought him here," Jorik said, his voice carrying across the chamber. "Did you also plan to hide from him what you were?" Cal's brow furrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" Jorik's gaze swung toward him, cold and direct. "Your new partner once wore the Steel Council's colors. She was part of the team that designed the very system you risked your life to dismantle." Kael turned to Seris. She didn't flinch, but her eyes didn't meet him. "Is that true?" he asked. Seris drew in a slow breath. "It is. I was a biologist assigned to the Crystal Harvesting Division. We were told the network would stabilize the storms and extend the survival of this world. We didn't know, at least I didn't, that it would be used to control food production, to keep the people dependent." Kael's voice was low, dangerous. "And you stayed on that job until... when?" Her jaw tightened. "Until the first storm season, when they cut power to an entire district to force compliance. Thousands froze. I walked away, disappeared. I've been trying to undo it ever since." "That's convenient," Kael said. Yorik's staff struck the floor with a sharp clang. "It's also the truth. I wouldn't have let her back into this mountain if I thought otherwise." Kyle's gut twisted. He'd seen betrayal before. It had its own scent, sharp and metallic, but he also knew what it meant to carry guilt heavy enough to drive you into enemy fire. He didn't trust her. Not yet. "I came here for a job," Kael said slowly. "Not to join your moral crusade. But if she's lying, I'll find out." Seris met his gaze then, her violet eyes unblinking. "You're welcome to try." The air between them was taut as a drawn bowstring. Around them, the rebels shifted uneasily, sensing the fracture line forming between two of their most capable fighters. That night, Kael sat alone in the docking bay beside the Iron Wraith. The core conduit rested in a locked crate, its pulsing light leaking through the seams. Every instinct told him to take his ship, leave this frozen world, and let its people fight their own war. And yet, he didn't. The council chamber of the Hollow Mountain was alive with tense voices and the glow of projected maps. Red markers pulsed over the image of Cryon 7's northern hemisphere, all converging on one structure, the Crystal Broadcast Station. "That's the real heart of their control," Jorik said, stabbing a finger at the map. "From there, the Steel Council can cut power, redirect the storm shields, and choke any settlement they please. If we take it, we own the sky." Kael leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "And I'm guessing this isn't a quiet job." Seris stood beside the map, her voice calm but firm. "It can't be. The broadcast station is built into the ice cliffs above Sleet Bay. Only a full assault will draw out the Council's elite guard. While they're distracted, a small team will enter through the service ducts and connect the core conduit to the station's master relay." Kyle's gaze shifted to the crate where the conduit sat. "About that, I've looked it over. We can rig it to emit a power surge strong enough to fry every crystal in their stockpile." Several rebels murmured in surprise. One of them, a broad-shouldered Cryon named Karev, stepped forward. "You'd destroy the only power source we have?" Kael met his eyes. "No, just theirs. We'll target the vaults under the Council's stronghold, the stockpile they keep for themselves." Jorik considered this. "If it works, it'll strip them of their leverage overnight," Seris added, "and force them into open conflict, where they're weakest." Kael spent the next 2 days hunched over the conduit in a workshop carved into the rock. Its coils were delicate, alive with energy even at rest. He soldered bypasses, calibrated overload channels, and modified the control crystal to respond to his own biometric signature. Seris assisted when she could, fetching tools, holding stabilizers, but mostly they worked in silence. On the third evening, she broke it. "You still don't trust me." Kyle didn't look up from the circuit board. "Trust gets people killed. Out here, it's just a word you use before someone puts a knife in your back." "And yet you're still here," she said quietly, "because leaving now would feel like losing." "I don't like losing." The night before the assault, the rebels gathered in the mess hall. The atmosphere was thick in a fear, determination, and the sharp scent of the herbal stimulant Cryons drank before battle. Karev voiced the thought many were carrying. "This plan is too thin. If the infiltration fails, we die in the open." Cal pushed away his cup. "Then don't fail. You've got people here who know every tunnel and ridge between us and that station. I know how to break their toys. That's enough." Seris's gaze met him across the table. She didn't speak, but the faint nod she gave him was enough to tell him that, for tonight at least, they were on the same side. The wind off Sleet Bay was a knife in the lungs, each breath turning to ice crystals before it left the mouth. Kel crouched behind a ridge of jagged ice, his gray infiltration gear blending into the landscape. Beside him, Seris adjusted the strap on her shock baton, her violet eyes fixed on the silhouette ahead, the crystal broadcast station, jutting from the cliffside like the fang of some ancient predator. Their team was small, Karev carrying a heavy pulse rifle, Lysa, a wiry Cryon engineer with a knack for disabling sensors, and a silent scout named Varen, who moved like a shadow. The four of them followed Seris down a narrow fissure toward the maintenance ducts. "Keep your heads down," she whispered into the comm. "The assault starts in 20 minutes. We need the conduit wired before then." Cal hefted the reinforced pack on his back, the core conduit's faint pulse warming the metal frame. "I'll wire it," he said. "Just keep the guards off my back." The maintenance hatch was half buried in ice. Lysa pried it open with a tool that sparked in the dark, revealing a cramped tunnel lined with frost-covered conduits. Inside, the air was warmer, smelling faintly of coolant and old wiring. They moved in single file, boots scraping metal. They emerged into the station's lower service floor, a maze of catwalks suspended over cavernous crystal amplifiers, each one glowing faintly with stored energy. Cal moved to the master relay terminal, a vertical slab of metal and light, and set the conduit on the access cradle. "Connection stable," he murmured, fingers flying over the interface. "Give me 4 minutes." Seris positioned herself at the nearest corner, baton ready. Karev and Varan covered the other approaches. Through the open comm channel, they could hear the muffled thud of artillery from the rebel assault outside. "How far will the broadcast reach?" Karev asked over his shoulder. "All the way to the poles," Seris said. "Every settlement, every outpost, every council channel. Once it starts, there's no shutting it down." Kael glanced up from his work. "We'll need 30 seconds of uninterrupted transmission to push the message and prime the overload. After that," the sound of boots cut him off. From the shadows of the service corridor, armed guards poured in, rifles up. The first volley of energy bolts hissed past Kael's head, scoring black scars into the relay housing. Seris moved first, baton cracking into a guard's helmet, discharging a burst of electricity that sent him collapsing. Karev's rifle barked in heavy pulses, dropping 2 more. "Keep working," Seris shouted. Kael gritted his teeth and focused, rerouting the conduit's output. Warning glyphs flashed on the screen, overload threshold nearing maximum. He ignored them. Another guard lunged at him, but Varine intercepted, a blur of steel striking flesh. Kael's fingers hit the final command key. "Conduit is live," he called. "Start the feed." Sarah slammed her palm against the manual broadcast trigger. Somewhere deep in the station, a great crystalline hum began to rise, resonating through the floor beneath their boots. The message was out. The station's crystal amplifiers flared, bathing the chamber in cold white light. Across Cryon 7, every comm screen, every public terminal, every holotable flickered, and the Steel Council's secrets spilled into the open. "This is Seris Veyra." Her voice rang over the planet, clear and cutting. former biologist of the Council's Crystal Harvesting Division. I have seen the truth you were never meant to hear. The Council has struck a deal with the Black Star Alliance. They will sell every crystal, abandon this world, and leave you to the storms. Their transports are already prepared. Kael kept his eyes on the relay's readout. 19 seconds into transmission. Keep talking, he muttered. Images followed. Signed contracts, shipment schedules, internal memos stamped with the Council's insignia. The capital's plazas erupted with shouts as citizens realized the scale of betrayal. In the southern mines, workers dropped their tools. In the polar shelters, families pressed closer to the flickering displays. At 28 seconds, Kael slammed his palm against the conduit's manual override. The pulse hit like the roar of an angry star. Energy surged from the relay into the conduit, then exploded outward in a wave of blinding azure light. Somewhere far below, in the vaults beneath the Steel Council's stronghold, rows of stored crystals shattered, their lights snuffed out in an instant. Alarms across the station went wild. Seris shielded her eyes from the flare. Did it? It worked, Kael cut in. They've got nothing left to power their shield grid. Through the comms, Jorik's voice came sharp and urgent. The Council's stronghold is exposed. All units now. The distant rumble of heavy weapons shook the ice beneath them. The rebels' assault force poured into the capital's frozen streets, plasma fire slicing through the cold air. The Council's elite guard tried to form a defensive line, but without shield cover, their positions crumbled. Kael and Seris fought their way out of the broadcast station, the conduit still glowing faintly in its harness. A squad of guards blocked the exit, but Karev's rifle cleared the way, each shot punching through armor with concussive force. By the time they reached the cliffs overlooking the city, the skyline was ablaze, not with fire, but with the light of rebel flares marking captured sectors. The Steel Council's banners were torn down, their emblems trampled into the ice. Kael glanced at Seris. She was breathing hard, her hair plastered to her face, but her eyes were alight with something fierce. You wanted a war, he said. Looks like you've got one. She met his gaze without flinching. No, we've got a chance. In the streets below, the Steel Council's rule was ending, not with silence, but with the roar of a people who had just learned they'd been left for dead and refused to accept it. The crystal broadcast station still hummed faintly behind them as Kael and Seris descended into the city. The air was sharp with the mingled scents of ozone, melted snow, and scorched alloy. Rebel patrols moved cautiously through the streets, weapons drawn, wary of any last ambushes. The Steel Council was gone. Not vanished, they were dead, captured or scattered, but their presence had collapsed like a frozen wall struck by a quake. Yet in their absence, the city felt unstable. In the great plaza before the council hall, factions had already begun to form. One group of miners argued with a cluster of armed militia, each claiming the right to guard the remaining crystal reserves. A trader shouted about reopening old markets. A former council aide tried to declare herself interim governor, only to be drowned out by jeers. They're tearing each other apart already, Kael said quietly, scanning the crowd. Seris's tone was grim. The council kept control by force. Without them, there's nothing to hold us together. Jorik appeared from the side streets, his fur-lined coat streaked with soot. We have a window, days maybe, before someone decides they should be the new Steel Council. He fixed his eyes on Kael. That someone should be you. Kael blinked. Not a chance. I came here to fix my ship and leave, not to sit on a throne. It's not a throne, Jorik said. It's a shield. You've earned trust in places I never could. That matters now. Kael shook his head. Trust is just another way to say you've got a target painted on your back. From the edge of the plaza, Karev stepped forward. If not you, then who? The people need one voice to keep the predators from circling. Kael's eyes slid to Seris. She held his gaze steadily, but said nothing. He knew she could take the position, yet her past would be a weapon in the hands of anyone looking to fracture the movement. Fine, Kael said at last, but not just me. You want to keep this place alive? We formed a council, one seat for each district, one for the miners, one for the traders, and one for her. He nodded toward Seris. Murmurs swept the gathered rebels. Some nodded, Others looked doubtful. Jorek's face was unreadable, but he gave a slow nod. Then it settled. A provisional council. We hold elections once the city is stable. Kael turned away from the plaza noise, his breath misting in the cold. He'd avoided thrones his whole life. Now he'd built one and chained himself to it. The first meeting of the Provisional Council was held in the old council hall, a circular chamber carved into the ice, its walls veined with frozen crystal. The banners of the Steel Council had been torn down, leaving only bare alloy hooks and the faint outlines of their insignia burned into the walls by years of frost. Kael sat at a long table with Seris to his right, Jorek to his left, and 7 other delegates from across Cryon 7. Each had been chosen in the chaos after the uprising. Miners in patched coats, traitors with weathered hands, militia captains still smelling faintly of gunpowder. Seris stood, activating a holomap above the table. Our priority is survival. The storms are growing worse each season. Without the broadcast station controlling the shield grid, we have weeks before the next surge hits the outer settlements. We must stabilize the weather, permanently. Jorek gestured to the core conduit's schematic. Kael believes it can be adapted to create a distributed shield network, powered by smaller crystal nodes instead of one central stockpile. That way, no single faction can control the planet's survival again. Kael leaned forward. But that means building new generators in every district. That's resources, labor, and security. If the Old Guard or the Black Star Alliance tries to interfere, they could cripple the whole project. Seris nodded. I'll lead the scientific division. We'll research ways to dampen storm activity directly, using the crystals to shift atmospheric charge instead of feeding the shield grid. It's dangerous, but it could mean an end to the storms entirely. Lysa, representing the Southern engineers, frowned. And if your system fails? Seris didn't flinch. Then we fail together. This is the only path forward. Kael studied her face. She wasn't hiding from her past now, if anything. She was daring them to hold it against her. Security became his domain. He mapped patrol routes, fortified generator construction sites, and armed volunteers from the settlements. In the mining districts, he walked the frozen ridges himself, speaking with crews, ensuring they understood the stakes. On the 3rd day, word reached them of sabotage attempts. Minor, but enough to slow the work. Told you, Kael muttered to Seris as they stood over the latest report. The Old Guard's still out there. She met his eyes. Then we make it clear this project belongs to everyone. If they attack it, they attack the future of Cryon 7. He gave a short, humorless laugh. You'd make a decent politician. And you, she said, are starting to sound like one. The work was slow, grueling, and under constant threat. But for the first time since Kael had landed on this frozen world, the air carried more than the scent of storms. It carried possibility. Weeks into the reconstruction, the hollow mountain felt different. The smell of machine oil and heated metal still lingered in the tunnels, but now it mingled with the scent of cooked rations and the occasional laughter drifting from the mess halls. Kael and Seris worked side by side more often than not. In council sessions, they argued fiercely about resource allocation, about security risks, about the pace of generator construction. But outside those walls, the arguments became plans, and the plans became progress. One evening, as they oversaw the installation of a generator in the northern ridge, Seris broke the silence. You still watch me when you think I'm not looking. Kael adjusted the rifle strap on his shoulder. Habit. Old pilots don't like surprises. Her lips twitched. And do you still think I'm a surprise waiting to happen? Every person's a surprise, he said. The trick is figuring out if it's the good kind. A week later, she asked for time on the planetary broadcast network. The council chamber was packed when she spoke. Miners with dust-streaked coats, traders still smelling of spiced cargo, militia members standing with arms crossed. I was part of the system that hurt you, Seris said, her voice steady. I believed in what the Steel Council told me, and I was wrong. I'm here to undo that work, and I won't hide from what I've done. If you cannot forgive me, I understand, but I will keep fighting for this world, with or without your forgiveness. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then Karev stepped forward from the crowd. If she's willing to stand here and say that, She's earned more than most council members ever did." Murmurs of agreement followed. After the session, Kael found her in the corridor outside. "That was risky," he said. "It needed to be said," she replied. A sharp voice cut in from behind them. It was Lisa, the engineer. "Not everyone's convinced," she said, her gaze locked on Seris. "Some think you're still playing a long game." Kael stepped between them. "Then they can take it up with me. We don't have the luxury of gutting our own ranks while the old guard's still breathing." Lisa hesitated, then gave a short nod before walking away. Seris looked at Kael, something softer in her eyes. "You didn't have to do that." "Maybe I did," he said, "because if we're going to survive, trust isn't optional. It's the only thing keeping this place from freezing over again." For the first time since they'd met, the space between them felt less like a fault line and more like a bridge. The alert came in the middle of a council session. A scout burst through the chamber doors, Frost still clinging to his armor. Ships, 3 of them, coming in from the outer orbit, Black Star Alliance colors. The room erupted in overlapping voices. Kael's chair scraped back as he stood. "What's their vector?" "Straight for Cryon 7, the scout replied. "Transmission already inbound." Minutes later, the Alliance's message played on the chamber's holoscreen. A stern-faced envoy filled the projection, his voice smooth but cold. "The crystal reserves of Cryon 7 are property of the Black Star Alliance, by agreement with the Steel Council. You will resume shipments immediately or face reclamation action." Seris leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "They think the Council's deal still holds." Jorek slammed a fist onto the table. "They think we're weak." Kael folded his arms. "If they push this, they'll park a blockade over the planet, starve us out without firing a shot." The Council debated, voices rising, but Kael stayed silent until they'd worn themselves out. Then he said, "I'll talk to them." The following day, Kael stood in the comm chamber, alone but for Seris at his side. The envoy's image flickered to life again. "You're not Steel Council," the envoy said, tilting his head. "Who are you to speak for Cryon 7? Kael didn't blink. "The one holding all the proof of your dirty deal. Signed contracts, shipment manifests, payment ledgers, all tied to your alliance's leadership. Imagine what happens when every system between here and the rim sees them." A pause, the envoy's eyes narrowed. "You're bluffing." Kael tapped a control. For a moment, the projection filled with damning images, the same ones broadcast during the uprising. "I don't bluff about this kind of thing. Pull your ships back, strike the claim, and I'll keep your name out of every rebel network in the sector." The envoy's jaw tightened. "You think you can threaten us and walk away?" "I think you've got more to lose than I do," Kael said evenly. "And I think you know it." There was a long silence. Then, without another word, the transmission cut off. Hours later, the scout towers confirmed it. The Black Star Alliance ships had broken orbit and jumped out of the system. At the evening council meeting, Jorek's voice carried over the assembled delegates. "The Alliance has withdrawn. Cryon 7 stands independent." In the streets, bonfires burned in celebration. Miners, traders, and militia danced together under the first clear night in weeks. On a balcony overlooking the square, Kael and Seris stood side by side. "You didn't tell me you were going to use the broadcast files," she said. "You didn't need to know," Kael replied. "Sometimes a surprise is the good kind." The cold morning light spilled across the plaza as the Provisional Council gathered for the first open session since the Alliance's retreat. The air still carried the faint tang of smoke from the celebration fires, but the mood was steady now. Less exultation, more purpose. Kael stood with Seris at the front steps of the former council hall. It no longer bore the Steel Council's insignia. The wall was bare, awaiting the new emblem of a world that belonged to its people. "We start with what matters most," Kael told the assembled crowd. "Food, shelter, heat. Every district gets its share. No one gets left in the cold." From the front row, a miner shouted, "And the generators." Seris stepped forward, her voice carrying clear and calm. "Construction continues in all sectors. The first 3 are operational. Once the network is complete, no one will control Cryon 7's weather, but Cryon 7 itself." The council chamber that afternoon buzzed with the sound of competing priorities, some delegates pushing trade, others demanding more security. Disagreements flared. But the new council handled them in open debate, not backroom deals. It was messy, but it was theirs. Weeks turned into months. The environmental project began to show its first signs of success. Wind patterns shifting, storm activity lessening around the shielded districts. In the northern wastes, scouts reported sightings of hardy fauna returning to the surface after years in hiding. One evening, Kael and Seris walked the ridge above Sleet Bay. The ice cliffs shimmered under the faint light of two moons. Below, the sea was no longer a frozen slab. It rippled, dark and alive. "You ever think you'd see this place start to thaw?" Kael asked. Seris shook her head. "I didn't think I'd live to try." He looked at her then, the wind tugging at his coat. "You kept fighting even when you thought no one would forgive you. That's the only reason we're here." Her smile was small, but it reached her eyes. "And you kept helping even when you swore you wouldn't care. That's the only reason I'm here." They stood in silence, watching the tide shift beneath the ice, until the wind changed and carried with it the scent of open water. "Ready to keep building?" Kael asked. "Always," she said. Cryon 7's storm still loomed on the horizon, but for the first time in decades, they did not feel inevitable. The uprising of Cryon 7 became more than a rebellion. It became a story told in mining camps, in trade ports, and in the shadowed corridors of distant stations. A reminder that no power, however entrenched, could outlast the will of those who chose to stand together. Kael Draven refused the crown they tried to give him, but his name traveled the stars as the human who helped a frozen world break its chains. Seris Veyra bore her past openly, and in doing so, built a future stronger than any fortress. The storms would come again, the cold would test them, and the old ways would try to creep back in. But Cryon 7 had learned to fight for its own survival, and to share it. In the end, that was how worlds were saved, not by one hand, but by many, holding on through the dark until the light returned.